Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Clinical Psychology Community UK. My name's Holly and today we're going to be talking about the social graces model. This might be a model that some of you have heard a little bit about but don't know much about, so don't worry, we're going to go into it. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and you'll get all the updates. Next year, 2021, I'm going to be doing a video a week, so on lots of different things. So let me know what you want to see in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you get all the updates. Okay, so today then on the social graces model, I'm going to introduce what it is, what the model is. I'm going to give you some examples of how to use the model potentially and what's worked for me. I'm going to give you some practical advice on how you can use the model, and I'm going to critique the model as well. So let's get straight into it. What is the social graces model? Well, it was developed by someone called Burnham. 2013 is sort of the reference. The references are at the end, so you can have a little look. If you search social graces model into Google, it will come up. So don't worry too much about the reference, but it's by a guy called Burnham. And essentially what it is, it gives you different characteristics that spell the acronym GRAAACCCEEESSS. So in the G's, you've got geography, gender identity, race, religion, age, ability, appearance, class, culture, caste, education, ethnicity, economics, spirituality, sexuality, and sexual orientation. So these are all of the different characteristics that the model includes. So what we mean by this is which of these affect you. We all are affected by these. All of these are parts of us, parts of our identity, and we have different intersectionality in all of these different identities. So what you can do with this, I mean, you can do loads. You can do absolutely loads. So some of the things you can ask is, you can ask yourself, well, in which areas of these am I privileged? So for example, in the race category, I'm a white woman, therefore I am in the privileged category. But in the gender category or gender identity, you know, I'm cisgender female, but in terms of gender female, so I'm in the sort of the less powerful category, or the underrepresented group. In terms of gender identity, I'm cisgender, as I said, you know, so I present as female. That is the gender that I feel resonates best with me. Therefore, because I am cisgender, I'm in the dominant group. So that kind of gives you an example of in which areas am I in the underrepresented or which areas am I in the sort of dominant privilege category. You can also think about which of these impact you on a daily basis. You can think of it in terms of personally, or you could think of it in terms of professionally. When I go through the examples in a minute, I have thought professionally, but I'm happy to talk a little bit about me personally as well. You can think about which of these are most important to you, which of these just don't resonate with you. For example, for me, caste doesn't really resonate with me. I don't feel that attached to that sort of demographic. I think, you know, I think potentially in my culture, we don't have a caste system in the same way. Yes, we might have a class system in Britain, and different cultures and a hierarchy in lots of ways, but we don't, I wouldn't say we have castes. But again, I could be wrong, but it's not something that I've experienced really. So that is the model. This is what these are. So these are different parts of us that form our identity, and intersect, you know, to form who we are as people and what our beliefs are. There are lots of different ways that you can look at it, as I've said, but a researcher called Totsuka developed their own approach, if you like, which is one question: which aspects of the social graces model grab you the most? So they wrote a paper, which again I'll reference, talking to therapists, I think it was therapists, or trainee psychologists, thinking about which elements of the social graces grabbed them the most and seemed important to them, which I quite like, because the way that this question, I mean, someone who's similar to me, we may not have the same social graces that grab us and that resonate with us. So that's what I quite like about it, is that it'll be personal to you depending on what your experiences are and, you know, your demographics and all of that sort of stuff. So let's go on to an example then. The ones at the moment that generally grab me the most are these ones. So I would say at the moment, gender identity, geography, education, race, age, and appearance are the ones that really seem important to me at the moment. I'm following Totsuka's approach, and there's no, defined number of social graces that you should choose. It's just whichever ones seem to grab you. And I'm not going to talk about all of them. I've kind of already spoken about a few, but I will talk about some. So I think in terms of gender, in my current role, working in mental health, it's a very female dominated world a lot of the time. Particularly in psychology. I think we all know that. But that kind of conflicts with my personal experience of being a young female, in that, we're often not taken seriously and things like that. But as soon as you step into work, you actually are taken seriously because gender's not an issue. So there's some sort of juxtaposition there that's sort of a really rich source for reflection for me. In terms of gender identity, I think this kind of, for me, goes hand in hand with age and appearance. So, as I said, I'm cisgender, so, I present as female. And I think for a long time, I've not wanted to perform that femininity, because I think being a young female who cares about her appearance, you're almost automatically... I don't know, you're almost automatically put down a few rungs, because you can't be that serious about anything if you care that much about what you look like. And it's not that I care that much. I don't, put a lot of effort into it or anything, but it doesn't matter. It's okay if I want to do that, is the point. And just because you like makeup, or you care about clothes and you spend some time picking out what you want to wear, it doesn't mean that you're not serious. It doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. So that sort of thing, for me, and that's all about performing, femininity. And the last one I want to talk about currently is geography, because I am English. I consider myself British, but for the purposes of this, I'm English. I live in Wales and work in Wales. So a huge majority, most of the people that I work with are Welsh, have, were born here, grew up here in the local area. I didn't. My partner did. This is sort of where he grew up, because we've spent some time living where I grew up. So we came here. But I don't know the local area. I don't know a lot of the local services. I don't know the area that well. And that is quite an issue, I think, a lot of the time in the work that I do, particularly working with clients, because they will ask for, directions or something like that. That's just something I really struggle to give, because I don't know the area. So that's something that's important for me at the moment. But then again, you can think wider geography. I live in the UK. We're a massively privileged country a lot of the time, particularly for me as a white middle class female. So there's that sort of that intersects with all of that. So I hope that kind of makes a bit of sense. That's how I've thought about the social graces in terms of me currently. But I thought it would be good to have an example from my history. So I've also included some what was important to me, what grabbed me the most when I was working in substance misuse. This is something I've done retrospectively as well, but it's lots of the similar things seem to grab me, but there are some differences. So geography is not in there, because I was working in my home county of Wiltshire, so I knew the area really well. I'd grown up there. That wasn't an issue. But gender identity, age and appearance definitely were an issue. So I became a team leader at the age of 24, and I was managing people who were older than my parents, particularly male agency workers who were older than my parents. And I don't think they liked that very much, to be honest. I don't know if they would have reacted in a similar way had I been a male 24-year-old manager. I don't know. Or even if I'd been a bit older and I was female, I really, really don't know. It's very difficult to say. But what I do know is that the way that I dressed, I wanted to make sure that I dressed professionally. I wore heels a lot of the time, and because of that, I think people were like, "Oh, she's what is it? Tim, nice but dim," that sort of thing. And I definitely felt some hostility because I was performing femininity, and I couldn't possibly be serious or experienced enough for the role if I cared about my appearance, which that was difficult. Similarly, in substance misuse, class, and I've grouped class and education together for me. So it was really important in substance misuse. And in terms of education, clients, I had this so often. Clients would ask, well, have you been through this? Have you been through addiction? Have you been through recovery? And it was very important to them that someone they were, working with as their key worker had gone through that. And I would never really answer, because it's not important either way, really. And I would ask them why they think that's important. Why is that important for them? And you get a range of responses back. But they didn't want someone who had learnt it from a book. It's what they always say. But I think that's something people do to put in a barrier a little bit. But education and class for me, as I said, go hand in hand. My first manager suggested that I tone down my accent because none of the clients would take me seriously. If I spoke quite clipped, none of them would take me seriously. So I did that. I absolutely did that because I was nervous and I wanted to fit in, and I was young, and I didn't realize that was wrong, what she was asking me to do. So yeah. That's what I thought was right. So I did soften my accent a little bit, came a little bit more Wiltshire, a little bit less clipped. And I don't know if it made that much difference. I really don't. It did to my manager, obviously, but that's definitely something that was important. And the last one I kind of want to talk about is race, because I think race is one of the difficult ones, I think, for white people, because of white guilt and white privilege. It's very difficult. And I think, I'm not saying it's not difficult for everybody. I can only speak to the experience that I have. So race was notable for me because there was really little diversity in our service, despite there being quite a lot of diversity, a fair amount of diversity within Wiltshire. It's still quite a white county, but there was some diversity in our service, in our locality, but there was very little diversity in the workforce, and clients in our service. There was very little. So I was in the dominant, overrepresented white group, and this was never challenged or discussed. Like, it was never a thing. And I think that's because I was around a lot of other white people. We didn't really know how to talk about it. We didn't know if it was appropriate to talk about it, because as white people, we've often been told not to talk about race because everybody's equal and we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't point out someone's race, for example. So it was never really discussed. And I stopped working there in January 2020, before the BLM movement went as loudly as it did, and before I had time to take much notice of it. But that's another reason that the social graces can be really helpful, because I have this professional self that was in, working in substance misuse, and then I have my personal self. I've done a lot of work on my white guilt and white privilege. I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about how best to be an ally in terms of lots of different ways. And I'm glad that I did, because I think it changes me as a person and who I am professionally as well. So I hope those examples kind of make a little bit of sense. And I would encourage you to think about your own social graces and what's important to you, and which groups you're in the underrepresented and which groups you're in the dominant. So I definitely would encourage you to do that. But here's some practical advice. So the first thing I would say, if you've ever watched one of my videos, this is always a tip because I think it's the best thing you can do. Keep a reflective portfolio. Just keep a folder with all of your reflections, anything you find interesting, all of your reflexive exercises like the social graces. I absolutely encourage you to do that. I encourage you to repeat the exercise. So like I've done, so how the social graces grab me now, how they grabbed me in my last job, and I've done it for each of my previous roles and stages of my life as well, because I think for me, growing up, I definitely felt differently to how I feel now about a lot of that stuff. So I'd encourage you to repeat it as well and keep it in your portfolio, because then you kind of see your journey and your development. For example, you can repeat it within that job. So you can repeat it every 6 months and see what's changed, see what's influenced you. For example, prior to George Floyd, we all might feel differently. But after that happened, and after, all the mass protests this year, and particularly after COVID, I mean, that's highlighted massive inequality. Things change. So if you do it on a 6 monthly basis, you can think about how you're influenced by the world around you, and that can then help you in your practice too. The other thing is consider which graces grabbed you most in your previous roles, as I've said, and consider your privilege or lack of. Those are some different ways to look at the social graces. You can look at each of them. You can do a reflection on each of them. That would be helpful too. So you think about, for example, sexual orientation. Are you in the privileged group? Are you in the underprivileged, underrepresented minority group? And how does that affect you as a person? And how does that affect you professionally? As I've said, me being a female, I think, has affected me in some ways, but in other ways not at all. So you can think differently about all your different roles and how you've been affected, and personally as well. And I really encourage you to write down your thoughts. I'm a real writing person. I need to have everything written down and color coded and everything. So I would write it down. And I've done a couple of different templates that I'll make available on the Facebook group. So make sure you join that. I'll give you details in a minute, of different maps and logs that you can use. But you can just write it yourself, do a journal or something. That would be really helpful. There's also a really great workbook that I found that I will link in the comments for download. It's all about how to use the social graces, and another different model as well. So that's some sort of practical advice. I'd encourage you to spend some time doing this. If you've got any CPD time in your role, or you feel able to do some of this, it might help you prepare for interviews. It might help you think differently about who you are and how your practice is affected by these things. Because we are all affected by these things. We all have. All of that is important to us in some way. It might not form our identity as much as it forms other people's identity, but it still forms our identity. And our identity as practitioners, as mental health clinicians, as therapists, as support workers, as healthcare assistants, that matters. It's not just about the client and what they bring. It's also about you, because you're trying to help them and be collaborative. So I definitely encourage you to spend some time thinking about it. You can also bring it to supervision as well, depending on what your relationship with your supervisor's like. It might be helpful to talk a little bit about them. So that's something I'd definitely encourage. Thinking a little bit about the critique then. So some positives of using the social graces model and some negatives. In terms of the positives, it's good for personal and professional development, I think. So like I've said, I think I focus quite a lot on professional development, but personally as well. I think it helps you realize which group you're in, if you're in the underrepresented, or the dominant group, and then work out how best you can support everyone and how best to be an ally if you're in that dominant group. There's lots of literature out there as well, books by Carla, Renee Edo-Lodge, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race is a really good one. I'll link some books down below, and I'll link a blog that I've written as well about being a best ally if you're interested. This model helps us understand inherent power structures related to our characteristics. So that's actually the point of this, is to really figure out what the power dynamics are. And as clinicians, we are in the powerful group, with our clients being in the more vulnerable, less powerful group. Supposedly that's how it kind of works. So it's also helpful to consider, well, if you are a white therapist and you're with someone who is from an underrepresented race ethnic category, then how does power play there, as well as your power as a therapist and as a clinician, as a professional, as well as what different genders or sexual orientations or culture, very different, but you've got to consider how all of these things impact that relationship. So definitely spend some time thinking about it. what I really like, particularly about Totsuka's approach, is what's important to us comes out. We're asked to think about what is important to us, and you can ask lots of questions of the information. Once you've thought a little bit about each category, you can ask lots of questions, as I said. So you can say, where am I privileged? What does that privilege mean for me personally? What does that privilege mean for my practice? I'm underrepresented. How does that affect me emotionally? Does that affect me in terms of my practice? Does that affect me in terms of how else does that affect me in my life? You can ask loads of questions. It's really, really open. So that's good. And as I said, it's applicable to lots of varied experiences. It could be different job roles. It could be clinical experiences that you've had. It could be you personally, personal experiences. So that's another, as I said, it's very open and it can be applied to lots of different situations. And it can be repeated. It can be repeated as often as you like. It can be, it could be a yearly exercise you do to, as part of your portfolio. But it can be repeated very easily. And it's interesting to repeat it because I've repeated it a couple of times and every time it's different. Every time. And there's different influences on me. So I'd encourage you to do that too. And this is an important positive, I think, of the model, that intersectionality is not theorized as neat. It's reflective of real intersectionality. So what we mean by intersectionality is that lots of these different characteristics that we have that form our identity, they intersect. So, for example, if I've got gender and I've got race, being a female is important to me. It is an important part of my identity, and being white is an important part of my identity. It is the reason that I've had all the opportunities that I've had, more, probably along with my education and my class, probably the fact that my culture is, very British, and that I can, speak to other white British people who are probably hiring me. Our cultures mix, that sort of thing. But equally, intersectionality in terms of, so we all know that being a woman is difficult, and being a black woman is even harder. Being a black woman who doesn't speak our language might be even more difficult, who's in a different country to the country she was born in, potentially. That all puts you on a bottom rung of the ladder. So that's what intersectionality means, and it isn't neat. It is messy and confusing, and I think that's a real positive of the model. In terms of some negatives, then, you really do need to be totally honest with yourself. That is essential. Otherwise, I don't think you'll get anything out of the model. I don't think you'll develop in the same way as if you were completely honest. You need to have an ability to acknowledge any privilege or lack of privilege. Again, I can only speak from my standpoint as a highly privileged person. You need to be able to accept that you have been born with some privilege, and not everything is down to your hard work. And that's not an easy lesson to learn always. But equally, if you are from one of the underrepresented groups, that's not an easy lesson either, because you're learning, well, this is completely unfair. I'm being judged, harshly, and it's unfair because I'm not going to succeed in the same way. Just I have to work 10 times harder, which is a hard lesson to swallow as well. So yeah, you need to be really totally honest, which is, I put it down as a negative. Just it's something to be aware of, really, when you're using the model. And it's difficult to know how to apply these reflections because there's quite little guidance. So how you actually apply that to your practice, essentially, I would use clinical supervision to talk about that and say, look, I've had to think about this sort of stuff, or use a case example. Spend some time thinking about a case example of someone that you've worked with, and think, well, what characteristics were at play here? What was important to both of us? Or even naming it in practice with someone, saying, I don't know, talking about whether culture is really important to them, or finding more information about them, what would make them most comfortable in that situation, building that therapeutic relationship enough to be able to ask each other things and be honest. So that's a little critique. In terms of a summary, the social grace model can help us think about characteristics in different ways, and help us reflect. It can impact on our practice as mental health professionals. And it also impacts us personally. So a deeper understanding of ourselves, when to be an ally, potentially how to be an ally as well. If you want to get involved with the YouTube channel, I hope that video was helpful today. Yeah, I'll put a unit on Facebook with all the materials that you might need. This is the Facebook group, UK DClinSci Applicants Reflective Space. Let me know what topics you want to see. Let me know what videos you want to see. As I say, I'm doing a video a week. I've got them all planned for January and February. I'm doing some on psychological formulation. I'm doing one on compassion focused therapy, one on EMDR, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. I'm doing one on reflective practice. I'm doing one on assistant psychologist applications. I'm doing loads. So let me know what else you want to see. And don't forget to subscribe or follow us on all of the social media. Thank you so much. Here are some references and resources. I will put the links down in the comments as well. But thanks for watching. And I hope that was helpful. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've used the model. That would be really helpful. And check out all of my other videos that I'll pop down below, available now for free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.